The grand ballroom shimmered beneath cascading crystal chandeliers, their golden light reflecting off polished marble floors and glasses of sparkling champagne. Outside, the city's skyline glowed against the night, but inside, the real spectacle was just beginning. Elegant guests filled the hall, business elites, socialites, and media figures, dressed in tailored tuxedos and flowing gowns. Soft orchestral music played in the background, barely masking the quiet hum of conversation. At the center of it all stood her, the wife. She wore a simple yet graceful evening dress, understated compared to the glittering crowd. Her posture was composed, her expression calm, but her eyes held a quiet nervousness, as if she knew she didn't quite belong in this world. Beside her stood her husband, confident, smirking, completely at ease. He lifted his glass, drawing the attention of nearby guests. Conversation slowed. Eyes turned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice loud enough to carry, laced with mock amusement, "I'd like to introduce you all to my wife." A few polite smiles appeared, some light clapping, but something in his tone felt off. He turned toward her, his smile sharpening. "You see," he continued, "not everyone here was born for this kind of life." A ripple of awkward laughter spread through the crowd. The wife's fingers tightened slightly at her side. "I mean, look at her," he went on, gesturing toward her as if she were an exhibit. "Still trying to learn which fork to use at a formal dinner." This time, the laughter grew louder, uncomfortable, but real. Her face didn't break, but her eyes flickered. Just for a second. Then came the sound that cut deeper than anything else. Clapping. Sharp. Enthusiastic. Proud. His mother. Standing just a few steps away, she beamed with approval, applauding her son as if he had just delivered a brilliant speech. "That's my boy," she added with a satisfied smile. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances. Others looked away, pretending not to notice. Backhand index pointing right if you're new to this channel. Make sure to like, thumbs up, subscribe bell, and share this video. And don't forget to comment what you think will happen next. The wife stood frozen, the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on her. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might speak, but no words came. Across the room, on the elevated stage, a man watched, the CEO. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his presence was quiet but commanding. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but his gaze was fixed, sharp, unblinking. The faintest shift crossed his expression, not amusement, not approval. Something colder, something calculating. The music had long since faded into silence, replaced by a tension so thick it clung to the air. And in that moment, as the husband basked in shallow laughter and his mother's applause, neither of them realized they were no longer in control of the room, because someone far more powerful had just started paying attention. Eyes fire. The ballroom still buzzed with uneasy laughter, but the atmosphere had already begun to shift, subtly, almost invisibly. The humiliation from moments earlier still lingered in the air like a stain no one dared to wipe away. High above the crowd, on a slightly raised stage framed by velvet drapes and soft golden lighting, stood the CEO. He was different from the rest of the guests, not just in status, but in presence. While others filled the room with noise, he occupied silence. While others reacted, he observed. A glass of untouched drink rested lightly in his hand, but his attention was not on the celebration. It was locked elsewhere, on the woman, on the husband, on the mother. His expression, at first, remained unreadable, calm, controlled, almost detached, like a man watching a distant negotiation unfold rather than a public emotional collapse. Around him, guests continued to whisper, laugh nervously, and steal glances at the unfolding drama below. But none of it seemed to reach him. The noise faded into the background, like waves against a locked door. Then something changed. The CEO's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. A shift, not dramatic but precise, like a calculation adjusting itself mid-process. His gaze moved back to the wife. The way she stood still. The way she refused to crumble, even as humiliation pressed against her from every direction. There was something in her silence, something that didn't match the way she was being treated. Then he looked at the husband. The arrogance, the careless dominance, the comfort in cruelty. And finally, the mother, still smiling, still satisfied, still clapping as if she were witnessing success instead of destruction. A faint exhale left the CEO's lips. Not laughter, not surprise, recognition. From somewhere in the crowd below, a guest leaned toward another and whispered, "He hasn't blinked in minutes." Another replied, "When he watches like that, something always follows." The CEO slowly set his glass down on a nearby table. The movement was calm, deliberate, yet it carried weight, like the closing of a decision rather than an action. His posture straightened slightly. The temperature of the room, somehow, felt colder. Below, the husband continued speaking, unaware that his moment of control was already slipping into something far more dangerous. The CEO's eyes followed him once more. This time, not as a spectator, but as a man who had already begun to decide consequences. And somewhere deep in the silence of that grand hall, the shift had begun, one that no one except him could yet understand. Earlier that evening, the city was already glowing under a soft golden sunset. Long shadows stretched across tall glass buildings, and the hum of traffic echoed through the luxury district like a distant heartbeat. Inside a high-rise apartment overlooking the skyline, everything felt quieter, almost fragile. The wife stood in front of a mirror. The room around her was simple but elegant. A neatly made bed, soft curtains moving slightly with the air conditioning, and a faint scent of fresh flowers placed carefully on the side table. She adjusted the fabric of her evening dress with careful hands, as if afraid to disturb the calm she had spent the entire day building. Her reflection showed a woman composed on the surface, but her eyes carried something deeper. Hope. And uncertainty. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and took a slow breath. Tonight mattered. It wasn't just another event. It was the gala her husband had spoken about for weeks, an important gathering of influential people, business leaders, and powerful connections. She had spent days preparing quietly, practicing how to smile, how to greet, how to exist in a world that never truly felt like hers. From the bedroom doorway, her husband entered. He didn't knock. He rarely did. Dressed in a sharp tailored suit, he adjusted his cufflinks with effortless confidence. His presence filled the room, not with warmth, but with expectation. "You're still not ready?" he said, glancing at her reflection rather than her directly. "I am," she replied softly, "just making sure everything looks right." He gave a short, dismissive chuckle. "Does it really matter? You're just there to stand beside me." The words landed quietly, but not lightly. She turned slightly toward him. "I thought this was important. For both of us." He walked past her, fixing his tie in the mirror without acknowledging her gaze. "It's important for me," he corrected. "Just don't embarrass me tonight." Silence followed. Outside, the city lights began to flicker on one by one, as if the world itself was preparing for something grand. Inside the room, she stood still for a moment longer, her expression unchanged, but something inside her shifted. Not broken, just quieter. She picked up her small clutch bag, holding it a little tighter than before. "Let's go," she said gently. He nodded without looking at her. As they left the apartment, the door closed behind them with a soft click, almost unnoticeable. But in that moment, something far larger than either of them had begun to unfold. A night that would start in silence and end in collapse. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, releasing them into the grand lobby of the gala venue. The space was breathtaking, towering marble pillars, golden lighting cascading from crystal fixtures, and the distant sound of a live orchestra tuning its instruments. Guests in elegant attire moved gracefully across the hall, unaware of the tension already forming behind closed doors. The wife walked slightly behind her husband, her steps measured and quiet. She held her clutch close, maintaining a calm expression, though her fingers were faintly tense. She was trying, carefully, silently, to blend into a world that never truly welcomed her. Her husband walked ahead, without slowing down. and beside him his mother. She matched his pace perfectly, her presence firm and unyielding. Dressed in expensive traditional attire, she carried herself with authority as if she had built the very room they were standing in. As they moved through the corridor leading into the main hall, she leaned slightly toward her son and spoke in a low, approving tone. "You look confident tonight," she said with a satisfied smile. "That's how a man of your position should carry himself." He smirked faintly. "Of course." Her eyes shifted briefly toward the wife walking behind them. The smile on her face didn't change, but her tone did. "She still looks unsure," the mother said, almost casually, as if commenting on something insignificant. The wife heard it, but she did not respond. The husband glanced back for a moment, his eyes sweeping over his wife with mild irritation. "She always looks like that," he said. "It doesn't matter." The mother gave a soft laugh, shaking her head. "That's because she hasn't learned yet," she replied. "A woman in your life should understand her place, not question it." The words were light, almost conversational, but they carried weight. Years of expectation. Layers of control disguised as tradition. The wife slowed slightly, but kept walking. Her gaze dropped for a brief second, then lifted again. She said nothing. She never did in moments like these. Silence had become her shield, even when it hurt to wear it. Ahead, the music from the ballroom grew louder, signaling their arrival. The crowd awaited. The night was about to begin. The mother adjusted her son's collar with pride. "Tonight," she said softly, "don't let anyone forget who you are." He nodded. Then, without looking back at his wife, he stepped forward into the grand hall. And the wife followed, quietly entering a space where she already knew she would not be seen, only judged. Behind her, the mother's final glance lingered for a second longer than necessary. A look that carried history, and approval of something far from kindness. And with that, they crossed the threshold into the night that would change everything. The grand ballroom had transformed completely. What moments ago felt like a quiet, tension-filled space was now alive with brilliance and movement. Crystal chandeliers hung like suspended stars, casting a warm golden glow over the polished marble floor. The air carried a soft blend of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and the faint sound of a live orchestra tuning into perfection. Guests continued to arrive in waves. Business magnates, celebrities, investors, and influential figures from across the city. Luxury cars lined the entrance outside, their doors opening to reveal elegance and power stepping into one room. Inside, conversations layered over one another in a controlled hum of prestige. "This year's gala is expected to break records," one guest whispered. "They say someone very important is attending tonight," another replied. At the center of the room stood the husband, adjusting his suit with quiet satisfaction. He moved with confidence, greeting familiar faces, shaking hands that mattered. Beside him, his mother stood like a pillar of approval, observing every interaction as if evaluating success itself. And just a few steps behind them, the wife. She remained composed, her presence soft yet distant. She offered polite nods when necessary, her smile restrained but graceful. Yet in a room full of attention seekers, she felt almost invisible. Still, she stood, enduring. On the elevated stage at the far end of the ballroom, soft lights dimmed slightly. A subtle shift in energy passed through the crowd as a staff member stepped forward to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said, voice calm but formal, "we are honored to welcome the chief guest of tonight's event." A hush began to spread. Even conversations slowly faded. From the side entrance of the stage, the CEO appeared. The atmosphere changed instantly. He walked with unhurried precision, every step controlled, every movement deliberate. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, he didn't seek attention, but commanded it effortlessly. Heads turned without permission. Whispers followed before silence reclaimed the room. "That's him," someone murmured. "The one who controls half the city's investments." The husband straightened slightly, watching with narrowed interest. Even his confident expression tightened, just a fraction. The mother leaned in, whispering proudly, "Now that is power." The wife looked toward the stage, her gaze steady but unreadable. The CEO reached the center podium. He paused. Not because he needed to, but because the silence belonged to him now. His eyes scanned the room once. And for a brief moment they stopped. Not on the crowd. Not on the applause beginning to rise. But on something else entirely. Something that would soon change the direction of the entire night. The ballroom, once filled with elegant charm and controlled celebration, now felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened into something suffocating. Every crystal light overhead seemed too bright, too sharp, reflecting off faces that were no longer amused, but uncomfortable. The guests had stopped pretending. Whispers spread in low, restless waves. Is he serious? This is getting out of hand. She's just standing there. At the center of it all, the husband stood with a glass in his hand, his confidence no longer subtle. It was loud, aggressive, almost desperate. The earlier laughter had fueled something inside him, something reckless. Now, he was no longer performing for approval. He was performing for dominance. He turned slightly toward his wife, his voice carrying across the silent space. "You see," he said with a cold smile, "this is exactly what I mean." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One woman looked away entirely. The wife stood still, not because she had nothing to say, but because every possible word felt too small for what was happening. Her chest rose and fell slowly, controlled, but her eyes betrayed the storm she was holding back. She looked at him, not with anger, not yet, but with something quieter. Disappointment. Beside him, the mother clapped again. Slow, deliberate, proud. "Yes," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "This is how discipline looks." That single statement broke something in the room. A man near the back muttered, "This isn't discipline, it's humiliation." Another guest shifted uncomfortably, setting down their glass. But the mother didn't care. She never looked away from her son, as if every cruel word he spoke was proof of success. The husband took another step toward his wife, lowering his voice, but increasing its sharpness. "You should be grateful you're even here," he said. "People like you don't belong in rooms like this." A sharp inhale passed through the crowd. The wife's fingers tightened slightly around her clutch. Her body remained still, but inside, something was beginning to fracture. Not loudly, but deeply. She didn't respond. She couldn't. And that silence only made the moment worse. Across the ballroom, conversations died completely now. Even the music felt distant, irrelevant. And then, for the first time that night, the wife's gaze shifted slightly. Not to her husband, not to his mother, but beyond them, toward the stage, where someone had been watching all along. And in that single moment, the air itself seemed to pause, as if the room was holding its breath for what came next. The silence that followed the wife's frozen gaze did not last long, but it changed everything. From the elevated stage, the CEO took a slow step forward. Not rushed, not emotional, controlled. But the moment his foot touched the edge of the spotlight, something in the room shifted instantly. The background noise of whispered conversations, clinking glasses, and restless movement, all of it began to dissolve. Even the husband noticed. His smirk faded slightly. His posture straightened, as if instinctively reacting to a presence he could not ignore. The CEO lifted one hand gently.
No microphone adjustment. No dramatic gesture.
Just a simple signal. And the entire hall fell silent. Absolute silence. It was the kind of silence that felt unnatural in a place this grand, like the building itself had stopped breathing. The CEO's voice followed.
Calm.
Firm. Unshakably steady. Enough. That single word echoed through the ballroom like a verdict. The husband blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Excuse me," he said, forcing confidence back into his tone. The CEO's gaze moved to him slowly. Not angry. Worse. Disappointed. "I said enough," the CEO repeated, softer this time, but heavier. "This performance ends here." A ripple moved through the guests. People shifted in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing a confrontation or a collapse of control. The mother immediately stepped forward, lifting her chin. With respect, she said, her voice tight, this is a family matter. It stopped being a family matter the moment it became public humiliation. The CEO interrupted without raising his voice. The words landed cleanly. No resistance.
No escape.
The wife finally looked up fully, her eyes reflecting confusion and something else. Relief, perhaps. Or disbelief that someone had finally spoken. The husband scoffed nervously. You don't understand the situation. The CEO took another step forward. Now closer. Now unavoidable. I understand perfectly, he said. A man mistaking cruelty for authority. A woman being reduced to entertainment. And a room full of people pretending not to see it. No one spoke. Even the air felt still. The husband opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time that night, his confidence didn't just crack. It disappeared. The CEO's eyes shifted briefly to the wife again. Measured, intentional. Then back to the husband. And that, he said quietly, ends now. And in that moment, the balance of the entire room tilted towards something irreversible. The ballroom remained locked in silence, but now it was no longer the silence of tension. It was the silence of anticipation. Every eye in the room was fixed on the stage, where the CEO stood like a final judge deciding the fate of everything that had just unfolded. The husband's arrogance had not vanished completely, but it had fractured. His confidence now looked forced, unstable. His mother stood beside him, her earlier pride replaced with a tight, unreadable expression. And the wife, she stood still, no longer invisible. Now, she was the center of something she did not yet understand. The CEO slowly turned his gaze toward her. For a moment, the entire room followed his line of sight. Even the air seemed to tighten. You've all been watching the wrong person tonight, he said calmly. A faint murmur moved through the crowd. The husband's jaw tightened. What are you talking about? The CEO didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into a slim folder placed on the podium beside him. He opened it with deliberate precision, as if each second was meant to stretch the tension further. This event, he continued, was not just a social gathering.
He paused.
It was a selection review. Confusion rippled through the room. The mother frowned. Selection for what? The CEO finally looked directly at the wife. For leadership. A sharp silence followed. He continued, his voice steady but firm. For the past several months, my organization has been observing key individuals across multiple sectors. Strategic thinkers. Ethical decision-makers. People capable of handling influence without abusing it. He turned a page in the file, and among all the profiles reviewed, his gaze lifted again. One stood out consistently. The wife's breath caught slightly, almost unnoticed. The husband let out a short laugh. This is ridiculous. But no one laughed with him. The CEO's voice dropped slightly. She redesigned the logistics model that saved one of our largest regional projects from collapse, he said, without taking credit, without even being asked. A wave of shock moved through the guests. The mother's expression changed, just slightly. Uncertainty creeping in. The CEO continued. She was the silent consultant behind a deal this city still profits from. Now the room was fully still. No ego, he added.
No recognition.
Just precision, discipline, and results. He closed the file, then looked at the husband. And you mistook her silence for weakness. The words landed like a strike. The wife finally lifted her head fully now, her expression shifting, not into pride, but realization. As if she was seeing herself through a lens she had never been allowed to use. The husband didn't speak. For once, he had nothing left to say. The CEO stepped back slightly, allowing the weight of truth to settle over the room. And in that silence, everything had already begun to change. The air in the ballroom had changed completely. What had once been a space of luxury and admiration now felt like a courtroom without walls, every guest silently passing judgment, every glance heavier than the last. The chandeliers still sparkled above, but their light no longer felt warm. It felt exposing. The husband stood at the center of it all. But for the first time that night, he no longer looked in control. His jaw tightened as he tried to regain his composure, but the confidence that once filled his posture had collapsed into something brittle. His eyes darted around the room, searching for support, for agreement, for anything that could restore what he had just lost. There was nothing. A few guests avoided his gaze entirely. Others looked at him openly now, no longer hiding their disappointment. The CEO's voice broke the silence again, calm but final. "Effective immediately," he said, "all pending partnerships tied to your company are under review." A sharp intake of breath spread through the crowd. The husband's expression shifted instantly. "You can't do that," he said quickly, forcing a laugh that didn't sound real. "This is a misunderstanding." The CEO didn't react. "That's already been decided," he replied simply. The words were not loud, but they were absolute. The mother stepped forward at that moment, her pride finally cracking. "Please," she said, her voice lower now, no longer commanding but pleading. "There must be another way. He's my son." For a brief second, even she seemed smaller. The CEO looked at her, not unkindly, but without softness. "Then teach him what responsibility looks like," he said. Because tonight, he confused power with permission. The mother froze. No response came. The husband turned toward her sharply, as if expecting her to fix what was happening. But she didn't speak. For the first time, she had no words left to defend him. Around them, guests began to murmur again, but differently now. Not with curiosity, with certainty. The husband took a step back, then another, as if the floor beneath him had changed shape. His earlier arrogance, his public display, his confidence, it all now circled back on him like a closing trap. And then he looked toward the wife. She was still there, still standing, but no longer beneath him. That realization hit harder than anything else. The CEO's voice softened slightly, but only in tone, not in meaning. "This is what consequences look like," he said. And in that moment, the room understood. Nothing would go back to how it was. The chaos behind her had faded into a distant hum. Not because the room was empty of people, but because the weight that had been pressing on her for so long no longer felt like it belonged to her. The wife stood near the edge of the ballroom now, slightly away from the center of attention. The chandeliers still glowed above, but the light felt different here, softer, almost like it had finally stopped judging her. For the first time that night, she exhaled fully. Not in defeat, but in release. Footsteps approached. Measured.
Calm.
Intentional. She turned slightly. The CEO stood a few steps away, no longer surrounded by the distance of authority, but closer now, human, grounded, yet still carrying that unmistakable presence of control. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "You handled more than most people in that room ever could," he said simply. She didn't respond immediately. Her hands, once tightly clasped, slowly loosened. "I didn't do anything," she said quietly. A faint pause followed. "That," he replied, "is exactly what everyone else misunderstood." The words landed gently, but deeply. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the gala continued to move forward, but it felt like another world now, one she was no longer trapped inside. The CEO reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim card. He didn't force it into her hands. He simply held it out. "You don't belong in environments that reduce you," he said. "You belong in rooms where your decisions matter." Her gaze dropped to the card, then slowly rose again. Not with confusion this time, but awareness. "I don't want pity," she said softly. A faint, almost approving expression crossed his face. "It's not pity," he replied. "It's recognition." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was open. Possibility instead of pressure. She took the card. Not quickly, not hesitantly, but with intention. Outside the grand windows, the city lights stretched endlessly into the night. Vast, alive, waiting. The CEO gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging a decision that had already been made. "You decide what comes next," he said. She looked toward the hall one last time. The place where she had been diminished, then seen, then understood. And now, finally released. When she turned away, it was not an escape. It was a direction. Her steps were steady as she walked forward, leaving behind the noise, the judgment, and the versions of herself others had tried to define. And for the first time, she wasn't walking away from something. She was walking toward herself.